This is Olivia Luna. She is the president of Babe Vote. Before we start, this is Jay Wan, and he is Boise Blackbirds. He's going to be filming, so if you do not want to appear on film that may show up publicly, like social media or anything like that, you need to tell him. We have little dots that you can wear also to remind him. We decided to do something fun, ice blocking at Simplot Hill, which I don't know how many of you have ice blocked before. All right. Okay. And then we also thought we should do something about how to react when ice comes and how to protect your neighborhood. So you let Olivia say just something real short. And then after this, after we ice block for a little bit, then we'll go over to my house. Richie is going to be there, and he is going to train us on how to react with law enforcement and ICE. Okay, this is Olivia.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm so excited. There's a lot of new faces that we haven't seen before, so I think it'll be really good. Thank you all so much for coming. I think it's so important to have community and do fun things like this, but also we're going to be doing a lot of really serious things, so I'm excited for this. Hopefully we get out all of our jitters right now and have some fun and stay safe. Make sure to stay on your butt. Don't do anything crazy, please. But yeah, we're just hoping to have a really fun event. Thank you everyone for coming.
Sit on your bottom, keep your feet up, put your towel down, your dish towel or your hand towel, or you'll get a wet seat, and do not go like stomach head first, okay? So who's brave enough to get started? Here we go.
You going first?
I'll try.
All right.
Woo!
Hey, we are here at Simplot Hill, ice blocking with Babe Vote. Damn! Nice! There you go. That was good. Right in the face.
They're just getting the hang of it. Oh my goodness! Woo! Yeah, niece. Go. Woo! Woo!
Winner!
I'm so sorry. That's just,
I mean, if I was some white guy with a cowboy hat.
Where most of the politicians you see that will or like on the daily. The purpose of it is to follow the rules of movement at the hands of police violence. One of the states.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for hosting this. I don't know, but good to see you.
Did you get something?
How about you?
Your salad dressing. No worries. Yes. Yeah. This is jalapenos. That empowers young people to organize their communities for democracy. No one that we could find was doing an ICE training, so we just decided to do it. And at the same time, we were trying to think of fun things to do. I suggested ice blocking because my gymnast used to take recruits over there, and just suggested ice blocking, the training, and so we thought we'd just put it together. Tonight will be a lot about law enforcement in general and knowing your rights and all that, and the Wednesday event really honing in on when ICE shows up. And I haven't been to the training, so I am really excited. I'm going to let Olivia talk, and then you can introduce Richie.
ICE is now working with police departments. I know that I think Hawaii County is working with them. Anybody else?
We can talk about this more, especially I think this is going to be a little bit more on our second training, but there's just like a contract that different police departments can sign with. It might be the Department of Homeland Security or I specifically. I'm not going to try to speak on that, but So far, the Idaho State Police has signed one, so Idaho State Police is ICE, effectively. And then, yeah, some other individual boards are signing them as well. But that's just kind of something that people have to track. So we just have to be vigilant about tracking that.
I just want to share, because I've sat down with them, Canyon County and Nevada, like the city of Boise, as far as I know, have not done that at this time.
Yeah, they haven't, those ones haven't, but it's kind of an ongoing thing that you just have to keep track of. I wouldn't put it past anyone. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Like Sam said, I'm Olivia Luna. I'm the president here at Babe Vote, and there's a lot of new faces, so I'm just so excited to have all of you here today and to learn about this because it's so important. So first of all, I'd just like to get people to know each other a little bit. Will you turn to your neighbor and tell them your name and why you decided to sign up to come today?
I'm J1. Nice to meet you. Don't mind me. Thanks. Just want to see what you got there.
All right, well,
One more announcement. These do not have walnuts. If anyone's allergic to walnuts, I'm going to put them right over here.
perfect. Like an important thing that we need to know about all of this is that it takes a lot of community support and communities working together if we're going to get anything done with this really awful situation. Just a couple things to note about what we're seeing, just to kind of ground us in what's going on right now. What's happening around the country is not normal. These are unconstitutional kidnappings without warrants, without a lot of the things that need to be done to get an arrest. A lot of this stuff is done without due process. People are not informed of what's going on, and it's unlike anything that we've ever seen before. And so, at least in this country. And so, when I just think it's important to see actually what's happening. The first video that we're about to show you, because right now ICE is literally just waiting outside of these courtrooms, waiting for these immigrants who have to go in for their check-ins to keep their status. They're just waiting outside of these courtrooms, usually in just normal dress, just like a t-shirt and jeans and like a mask because they like to cover their faces. And they're just waiting outside of them and then illegally kidnapping them. So this is something that they're seeing like hundreds of every day. That's a lot of what we're seeing right now, families getting ripped apart. Basically throughout this training, there's gonna be a lot of heavy stuff that we're seeing, right? This isn't normal. This is really intense stuff. So it is emotional. It's an emotional topic, but what's the most important is that we have communities that are built and ready to act when we do see these problems occurring around. So an example that we are seeing in places like New York that have really built out and resilient, like organized efforts to stop these are things that are actually really impactful. And so if we can kind of build something like that, then we can actually make a difference like we're seeing here. So the second video is an example of people getting together and actually stopping something. They're literally linking arms and chanting at ICE, and since ICE can't arrest citizens, they're backing up. And sometimes it's not like going to completely stop the arrest, but it does delay it a lot, and that does actually impact things. And sometimes it does completely lead to de-arrest. So if we can work together and we can actually understand how to do this, and we can actually work as a community and have something built, then some things like this can actually happen, and we can, even if it's just like one person that we can prevent from getting kidnapped by ICE, that's a huge impact. So we're really trying to gear everyone up to hopefully get that done. So thank you all so much for being here. We have Richie here, who's an attorney at Rest, who's going to be doing our training today. So I want to give it up for Richie. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Babe Vote, for putting this on. There's a lot of work that went into this, and then there's a lot of work still to come because we're going to do this tonight, which is actually a 3-hour training crammed into 2 hours. Then we're going to be back. Part 2 is not a repeat of tonight. Part 2 on Wednesday downtown is going to be another 2 hours, and that is pretty much a more or less brand new training that is going to build off of what we do tonight and look at ways that we can engage and intervene to protect our neighbors and our friends and our families and people who are being targeted right now. My name is Richie Epping. I am a lawyer who's been working with community members and movements in Boise since 2007. And I work with an organization called Rest Collective. We are a nonprofit, community-funded, all community-funded, movement-driven, sliding scale law firm that also has around it a community cooperative. And as far as I know, we are the only community cooperative driven nonprofit legal organization that exists out there, because we want to be guided and centered by the people who need our help most and by the people around us geographically in our neighborhoods. If you're interested more in REST, you can use this QR code or go to our link tree or go to rest.coop. Or if you want to, on Thursday, if you don't have enough going on with these two trainings this week, you can come to our next cooperative meeting, which is this Thursday at 6 p.m. at the Lennon Building, which is at 14th and Grove downtown. And that's this Thursday, and we have those every month. And we are also having trainings of different types that are basically every month as well, separate from the co-op meetings. The next training, I think it's going to be in late July or early August, and that's going to be focused on prison and police and abolition of those things, and give you groundwork on that. And then I think the one after that, which will probably be late August or September, will be on electronic security and privacy, especially for activists, how to communicate and store information more securely than you're probably doing that today. But anyhow, tonight we're going to focus on the building blocks that are going to groundwork, community work together to defend against ICE, in particular immigration enforcement, and in this state, Customs and Border Patrol, which is operating primarily in northern Idaho. But a lot of the people that you're seeing on social media around the country on videos are often, the ones that I've seen recently, often actually are CBP, which is also part of the Department of Homeland Security, but separate from ICE. But both of those agencies are doing things that are really alarming right now. Now, tonight, we are going to start by focusing specifically on basic law enforcement interactions. And so we're not going to get too far in tonight towards actually engaging with officers intentionally and intervening in things like the last video that Olivia just showed you. That's going to be on Wednesday. The truth of the matter is that some of you, I suspect, have been in a law enforcement interaction. For some of you, that law enforcement interaction, if you've had one, may have been stressful, but you made it through it, and you're here today to have this training. For a lot of people, a law enforcement interaction of any kind is stressful, but especially a law enforcement interaction of the kind that we're seeing that ICE does. And so some of you I know, because I've seen you at trainings that I've done, have been through the 3-hour intensive law enforcement training that I have done, I don't know how many times anymore, dozens of times over the last 15, 16 years. But all of you here are going to get at least an hour and a half of that tonight. And that's critical for a couple of reasons. One is it'll give you a sense of how difficult it can be to interact with a law enforcement officer of any kind. Now, I'm going to partially simulate law enforcement interactions today and on Wednesday. I'm not going to simulate them completely because I'm not going to be wearing armor. I'm not going to be wearing a firearm. I'm not going to restrain anybody. But I am going to use some of the tactics that law enforcement use, including ICE and CBP. It's also important for you to go through these interactions protecting yourself, learning your rights with law enforcement so that you can understand what other people are going through in those situations and interact with those situations with that in mind. And for a third reason, it's important to learn these things because these are the same skills that anybody who might interact with law enforcement, including people who are being targeted by ICE, ought to know. And so you'll be able to, as we'll get into on Wednesday, be able, in some instances, to empower people on the street in a particular interaction by informing them of their rights sort of at the last minute. So for all those reasons, tonight we're going to focus on law enforcement interactions as if you were the one that law enforcement was targeting. And then on Wednesday, we'll talk about how you might engage in those interactions to potentially protect or empower somebody else. Questions, speaking of cops?
That is just
Everybody got all nervous.
it was a trap.
Imagine that you are approached involuntarily by a law enforcement officer, ICE, Boise Police, Ada County Sheriff, Idaho State Police, doesn't matter. Or you're pulled over, driving your car when you leave here, whatever. What are your goals in that situation? And there are two goals that you can have. There's two goals that you can actually accomplish if you are in an involuntary law enforcement interaction. And the first is to survive it. To survive that encounter so that you go home to your family, or at the very least, you are alive when you make it to the jail and not injured. Ways to do that, ways to help yourself survive, are going to be valuable whether the cop interaction is involuntarily or, as we'll talk about more on Wednesday, if you're intentionally inserting yourself into a law enforcement encounter, and that is to calm yourself down. The calmer you are, the better decisions you're going to make. But the problem is that there's a lot of different things in the law enforcement encounter that are designed to escalate your emotions and cause you to make bad decisions. So how do you calm yourself down? Well, that's really kind of an individual question. And some of you, I suspect, have worked in workshops or with counselors or therapists on things that can calm yourself down. But here are just a few things that work for some people, and you have to figure out what is it for me. And you can think about this while we're in this training tonight. What is the thing that I'm going to do when I suddenly get pulled over by the cops, or when I suddenly see somebody I believe to be Border Patrol or ICE talking to somebody and I've decided I want to intervene in that? Some people, it works for some people to focus on their senses. Some people have probably heard about, you can think about 5 things that I can see, 4 things that I can hear, 3 things that I can touch, and just really begin to reground yourself in your senses. For some people, that really works to calm them down. Other people, it's even simpler than that. It's deep breaths. You can just take a deep breath. You're sitting in that car, the cops got the lights flashing behind you, and you're waiting for that cop to come up to your window. You can just take some deep breaths, hold them, and then release them. For some people, it works. This one I like the most, to focus on your muscles, maybe starting at your toes, and just kind of relax them one at a time. Like relax your toes slowly, then your heels, and then your legs, moving up your legs, and keep going. And for other people, it's just looking around, whether you're in your car or on the street, and finding some familiar things. It's like, oh yeah, that's my bike out there. That might reground you. Probably most important to calm yourself down is what we're doing tonight, which is to practice and prepare for this. So if you get through tonight's training and come on Wednesday and you decide, hey, look, I want to be a freedom fighter right now who's going to protect my community from these kidnappings, you should be practicing and preparing beyond today and on Wednesday. You should find your friends, your affinity group, whoever it is with you, and practice these things that we're going to do today on a Wednesday, because just the same as with athletics or whatever it is that you do, piano, the more you practice, the more confident you're going to be in those situations. And that's kind of the biggest key to being able to stay calm and be effective and make good decisions in those things. But that is your number one goal, and a goal that you can have some control over in a law enforcement encounter. Your second goal of two, this is two of two things you can do in this cop encounter, beyond surviving it, is you can protect your future. Once the cops are there, once ICE is there, it is very difficult, and as you have seen, for those of you who've been watching what's happening on social media around the country with ICE, it is difficult, if not impossible, to stop the cops from doing what they're gonna do. A lot of the times the cops, when they engage, when they begin that encounter, they have already decided what they're going to do, and the only thing that you're gonna do is make it so that it's easier for them to do that. The only ways people can actually avoid arrest is by preventing it in the first place. And we may have time to get to some of the things that you can do. Question?
We're legally allowed to record any interaction we have with police at all times. Or is there
The question was, are we legally allowed to record any interaction when we have with police? And the answer to that is mostly yes.
Okay.
If you're able to make it on Wednesday, we're gonna spend a whole bunch of time talking about recording cops, and we'll go into more of that. But the answer is basically yes. You have a right to video police, at least in public places, if you're not interfering with what they're doing. And so it gets a little bit tricky when we talk about whether you're interfering what they're doing, and we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. But if you go downtown after this and there's cops down there and you're on a street and you're not impeding traffic and you're not, in this space that the cops believe that they need to work, then yes, you can record them. When you're in that law enforcement interaction, a lot of people are just like, what can I do to avoid arrest? And there's really not much, because they've either decided that they're going to arrest you or whatever they're gonna do to you, or they don't know yet. And so the ways that you can avoid arrest are either preventing the encounter in the first place, and like I said, we might end up with some time to talk a little bit about some things that you can do tonight, even to make it less likely that cops are gonna interact with you. But the only other thing that's gonna change what the cops do in that interaction is if you give them more information that makes them decide, yes, in fact, we are going to arrest that person. So once the encounter has begun, there's not much you can do other than not give them the reason that they've been looking for to arrest you. And most cop encounters, now what we see with these ICE abductions, kidnappings, is that ICE is actually just looking for someone. They have what they call a warrant, even though it's not actually a warrant. We'll talk about that a little bit later tonight. And they're just picking people up off the street or out of the courthouse or out of wherever they're going. The elementary school graduation that some of you may have seen recently. But in the kind of encounters that a lot of us are gonna have with cops, those encounters are built on sort of a hack of the human brain. The entire encounter is set up by police to make you feel as though if you tell them the right thing, that you're gonna be fine. When in fact, what they want you to do is talk so that you won't be fine.
Think of something where I would give them more information than I should, like a speeding ticket, or is that what you're, or is this?
I saw a video where this girl, she had like an accent, and no, you're good. He asked like, oh, like you have an accent, like where's that from? And then she started giving information and saying that she was actually born, I think, like from Brazil or something. And then because of that, he ended up letting her go, but then she ended up getting pulled over by ICE.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Or, and probably the most basic example that's happening, that will happen sometime tonight, you get pulled over and the question is, where are you coming from? I'm coming from the bar. How many drinks did you have tonight? I had 3 drinks. That's the information that they're looking for, because they might breathalyze you, take you to jail anyhow, but those admissions are then going to be used to seal your
What
fate.
do you say instead, if you want to be honest?
Nothing, and that's what we're going to practice tonight. Now, and the other thing that's important about this, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it's not just you either. It is not just protecting your future, it's protecting your friend's future and your family's future. Because the questions that cops are asking you, you may assume that they're about you. But they may, in fact, especially those of you who, which I guess is really all of you if you're here tonight, are engaged in some form of activism, those questions may actually be part of a larger investigation that's exploring a network of people. And what may seem to be extraordinarily innocuous to you may in fact be a little tiny piece of a jigsaw puzzle that's being assembled in some detective's office somewhere that you will find out about months, years down the line. And so it's not really just a goal. If you're engaged in concerted activity and activist work right now in the United States, this is your duty. It's your duty to protect your friends. And that means we don't cooperate with the cops because they get our friends when they get our information. Somebody, probably, maybe not after I say what I'm about to say, but in a lot of these trainings, at some point, somebody will raise their hand and say, can the cops do X? And the answer to that question from me is always going to be yes, the cops can do X. We're seeing them do all of these things on video right now. The question that we have control over is what happens later. The courts are going to sort that out while we still have functioning courts in this country at least. But what the cops do or don't do to you is going to depend on whether you exercise your rights or not. And even then, it might not matter. They might be willing to risk it and find out what the courts are going to say later. So don't think about what they can do or can't do. Think instead about making a record. So let's talk now about what we actually do. This question, what do we say if we actually want to be honest? And the answer is we don't say anything. So I'm going to tell you here in the next, 10 minutes, the basics of your rights in this country, everybody's rights in this country, and then we're going to turn that into how do we actually do that. And then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to practice that in multiple situations.
Right. When you say it applies to everyone, can you qualify if that means people under 18 as well as people who don't have legal status here? Do they have, or at least when it comes to it, can you qualify this does not, apply? Because I'm sure there's some difference.
So everything we're going to practice tonight, everything we're going to say applies to everybody, regardless of legal status. There's only one exception in general, and then there's some specific stuff that I'll talk about in a little bit. The only one exception in general is if you or your loved one is on probation or parole, you may have waived some of your rights. If you are on probation or parole, or somebody that you care about is on probation or parole, that's a good question to talk to me at a break, because cramming 3 hours into 2 hours, we're not going to have a whole bunch of time to go into probation and parole, and it's kind of specific because everybody has a parole agreement or probation agreement or conditions on their probation or parole that explain what they can and can't do. So there's some things that if you're on probation or parole, you can't, you have waived some of your rights. For people under 18, everything that I'm saying here applies to you. You can do all of these things. You should do all of these things. The thing that's going to affect you is that your parents sometimes can waive your rights for you, and there's not much you can do about that in the state of Idaho, sadly, unless you want to join the military, which is basically the only way to emancipate yourself before 18. Everybody here can do all of the things that I'm talking about. If you're on probation or parole, there may be some rights that you waived. So the first thing is that you don't have to talk to anyone, period. Even if you've been arrested, even if you're in jail, only a judge can order you to answer questions. So if you're in front of somebody that you believe to be a judge, that judge maybe can order you to answer questions. Otherwise, in this country, we have the right not to talk to anybody. Signing a document can be the same thing as talking. And so oftentimes in a situation, you'll have a document put in front of you, and that's in fact what's happening in ICE courthouses around the country, or in immigration court around the country right now, is people are being signing documents that are ending their cases so that they can be then expeditedly removed from the United States. So just remember that talking is not just talking, but also signing a document that's sitting in front of you. The other basic right that we have in this United States is you don't have to agree to let anybody look through your stuff, your bag, your car, your house. You don't have to let anybody in your house either, ever.
I do have a question about not agreeing to let people like look at your bag or things. What if you're in an airport?
Here's the thing about airports and border crossings. If you want to fly in the United States, you have to subject yourself to the security check. And you can't, if you refuse it, you could be refused entry to the airport. In fact, you probably will. Even more tricky right now is border crossings, which sometimes take place at the land border and sometimes take place at airports. So if you are entering the United States, we don't have time, unfortunately, anymore tonight to get into the intricacies of that, because it has gotten very complicated, and like things are changing on pretty much a week-to-week basis right now, or there's new developments on a week-to-week basis. The short version of, if you're planning to be entering the United States right now in 2025, here are my 4 recommendations for you. Number 1, limit the devices that you're going to take with you, and limit what's on those devices. So you might, if you're going to leave the United States, you might get, a burner phone and a laptop just for that trip. The devices that you do have with you, encrypt those devices with strong passwords that are unique to each device. So your phone should have a different password than your laptop, than your tablet, so that if they end up with a password to one of them, they don't have the keys to everything you own. Turn on airplane mode before the actual border crossing, because supposedly, we don't know to what extent, but supposedly Customs and Border Patrol is not supposed to be accessing cloud services. So if your phone is connected to like a cloud backup or whatever, if you have airplane mode when you enter the crossing and then you turn it back on, and you, especially if you note the time that you turn it back on and you see that there was access to your cloud backup during that inspection, that might be evidence that Border Patrol was doing stuff that even their own internal memos say they're not supposed to be doing. And if you're carrying any privileged information, like if you work for a law office or something like that, announce that to the inspection officers so that you've at least made a record of that. But yeah, if you choose to fly, even domestically, you're going to be required to subject yourself to the inspection that many of us are familiar with from an airport. And so if you refuse, you still have the right to refuse, but they also might turn you away from the airport.
You're saying that you don't have to let them in your home?
Correct.
What if you have an illegal in your home? They can't come in?
You never have to agree that somebody can come in your house. That's a right that we all have here in this country. Now, they may come in anyway. Remember this, what they can do, they might still come in your house, but you don't have to let them in. You don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to agree to let anybody look through your stuff, which includes you don't have to agree to let people come into your house. Somebody asked about exceptions earlier. There's one exception that I wish was not this complicated, but it is kind of complicated. And this has to do with identifying yourself, either by showing an ID or just saying who you are. In some states, not Idaho, in some states, there are laws that require you to identify yourself to law enforcement when you've been asked by law enforcement to identify yourself. Idaho doesn't have that law. We do not have a law that requires you to identify yourself to law enforcement. However, people in Idaho have been successfully charged and convicted with a misdemeanor called resisting and obstructing officers when they have refused to identify themselves. And what the officer then says is that, well, I needed to write this person a citation, like a speeding ticket, and I couldn't write the citation because I didn't know who they were, and therefore I was delayed in my duties, which is a violation of that statute. So if you choose to not identify yourself to law enforcement officers in Idaho, even though we don't have a law that says you have to, you could be arrested and charged with resisting and obstructing an officer.
I was curious. Right, you get pulled over, you identify yourself, and what if they don't believe it's a real ID and they say, do you have your social security, something to prove that this is you? Are they allowed to say anything like that, or this is my identification card, this is what I have?
When you say real ID, do you mean like an actual
Yeah, like the
ID?
the real ID, the one that
The real
star,
ID
sorry,
law,
the
star
yeah.
card, real ID card. So for driving around, you don't need a real ID in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
You do, I believe, at this point need a real ID to travel on an commercial airline.
Or you can use your passport.
Or passport.
Yeah, which passport qualifies as a real ID, or the passport card does as well. But yeah, so if they ask for additional identification and you're in a vehicle just driving around or on the street, I don't believe that there's a legal basis for them to ask for that. You have to and we'll talk about this if we have time in traffic stops. You do have to. Cops can require you or ticket you if you don't have it to show your driving privileges, which is usually a driver's license and proof of registration of the car and proof of
Right.
insurance for the car.
But they probably shouldn't be like, where's your social security card?
Yeah, you could refuse
Okay.
that.
Are they allowed to ask for the IDs of other people in the car?
They certainly can
Besides the
ask
driver.
for them.
Right, but do you have an obligation to give IDs if
So
you're not the
that,
driver?
yeah, and that is where we end up in this unfortunately complicated situation where, so let's say I'm a passenger in the car, the cops say, hey, I want to see everybody's IDs. The risk that the passengers have in refusing to identify themselves is that the cop then says, well, I need to write them a ticket for whatever it is, open container in a vehicle.
Right.
And then they could be arrested for resisting and obstructing.
Okay.
So there's no law that says they have to identify themselves, but the cop could claim, I need to write a ticket and I couldn't do it because I didn't know who they were.
Right, right.
So last little caveat here is for non-citizens. If you or your loved one is not a citizen and an immigration agent like ICE asks for your immigration papers and you've got immigration papers, it's a misdemeanor if you do not present them to the officer. So for documented non-citizens, if they're asked for their papers, they risk a misdemeanor. You risk a misdemeanor if you don't show them.
And if you don't have your papers?
That's right. You've got if you've got like a green card or a visa, you could face a misdemeanor if you're not able to show your
Right,
papers.
because then it says technically you're undocumented if you don't have it on you, right?
It's not that you're technically undocumented, it's just that you're supposed to have them and present them to an
Okay.
immigration agent on request.
Got you.
And for those who are undocumented, they can face a felony. You can face a felony if you lie or present fake papers. Those are little wrinkles for folks who are not citizens, and we already talked about border crossing. So the big question here, which was a great question, is what do we actually do about this? And there's a lot of pros and cons to the fact that where we go, there's cameras, including on cops' bodies now. But one benefit is that compared to 10 years ago, it's a lot easier to prove that you asserted your rights because almost everything is recorded, especially in a law enforcement encounter. We are going to learn this, which is the primary counterspell against cops, and it is exercising our 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights under the United States Constitution, and it's this. I am going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer. Go ahead and say it.
I am going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer.
And so when you say this, you're going to say it clearly and look at the cop that's nearest to you, because it's probably going to be the closest microphone, so that we get it on tape, so that it's clear in the future. And you're going to say what?
I am going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer.
And you can say this at any time. So even if you're sitting there in your car and you just told the cop that you just came from the bar and that you just had 3 drinks, and then all of a sudden you're just like, wait a second, I was just at this training and Richie said I was supposed to say silent. You can then be like, you know what, actually I'm going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer. Now, that's not going to erase what you already said. There's nothing we can do about that. But it will invoke your rights at that time. The other thing that I want to make very clear to you, this is a counter spell in terms of invoking our rights, but it is not a spell that works on you. You have to then say this and then shut your mouth, which is actually for some of you going to be the hardest thing of all of this whole bit.
If someone who is dual language but more predominant in Spanish speaking, are they able to say this in Spanish too and it count, or they have to say it in English?
I would not count on any cops understanding anything other than English, and maybe not even that. And so if you or your loved one has limited English proficiency, I recommend getting a card.
The red card, right?
The red card works, but there's also just cards that say, and I should have brought some tonight, but I didn't think about it. If we need them somewhere, let me know, because we can get these cards for you. And they just say this, and then they say, I want an interpreter, or I need an interpreter in whatever language.
Okay.
And just hand that card over, and then don't say anything.
Okay, so even if, let's say, they have the red card and they're not confident in saying it in English, and they were to hand that to the officer, that's not enough. They have to say it out loud.
You don't have to say it.
You don't have to say it, so you can hand it.
You can just hand it, and some cops are not going to take the card, and so if you see a lot, so cops, their on-body video, if they have one, is often right here, somewhere around here, and just kind of hold it up to that on-body video and hope that it gets captured that, hey, this is what I did.
Okay.
So you have cards that say just this?
Correct.
And I'm wondering,
Right
do
as-
the cards have this in Spanish on the other side, just so the person handing it knows
Correct,
what they're
yeah.
saying?
What are you going to say?
I am going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer.
I need an interpreter in Spanish.
How does that like affect breathalyzer tests in that sort of like area? Because it's technically not a search, I think.
So this is not going to help you with a breathalyzer test. You can refuse that breathalyzer test, but you're going to lose your driving privileges if you do for some period of time. And it does make it harder for them to prove the DUI if they don't have that test. But it is going to affect your life for a year or so.
I know once one of my teachers talked about how like for schools specifically, like if a student was like subject to a search like in their car or something, that like it's their school's like charge, so they can have their like SRO whatever like go and search the car because it's their property. So are there places like schools that like you're subject to a search even if you say no?
In schools, people under 18 in schools, and maybe even people over 18 in some schools, are going to have some diminished rights. The good news about a lot of this is that we don't have to learn any of that stuff. It's complicated and it's intricate, and the cops are supposed to have training on when they can do what they can do. For us, our response to all of this is the same. So it may be that I'm in school and they search my locker and I never know about it. There's nothing I can do about that by saying anything. My rights are still my rights regardless what I say, but if you are asked, hey, can we search your locker? You have a right to refuse that search. They may do it anyhow, but you can make a record. So many searches, they're justified because the cop says it was consensual. That person agreed to let me search. And they are trained for more hours than 2 that we're going to spend on this tonight on how to persuade you to giving consent to a search. But if you just say this, what is it?
I'm going to remain silent. I do not consent to any searches. I want to see a lawyer.
You're going to foreclose that justification for the search, which is used in hundreds, thousands of searches to justify what they did.
Obviously, if you are doing something on the other side of the law and then that you might want to hide, like maybe it's something in your car or your backpack, or you don't have papers or whatever, obviously it's in your best interest to say this. But let's say you're driving down the road and you get just pulled over, you don't think you did anything wrong, or maybe you rolled a stop sign. Would you still say this kind of thing in that situation? Or if you just answer, I mean, I've been pulled over maybe 20 times in my life, and like I've never used this. I'm wondering, in those 20 times, if I did use this, would some of those 20 situations where I got off, obviously as a white male, is very privileged position, but would I be maybe 18 of those 20 would have been smooth, and 2 would have had me at a precinct? You know what I mean? Like, if you don't feel like you're doing anything wrong and they want to search my car and I don't have weed in the trunk or a weapon, like why not go along with them? And like, they're not gonna, I don't know.
They could plant something.
Well, they could. I mean, obviously there's things, but there's also a lot of ways it could go sideways. If I do stand up to them and like be like, you know, then I'm there for 3 hours, and then, you know, there's, I don't know, just proposing that other side, that it's not always maybe one-sided.
When we get to court, whoever it is that goes to court, it's never going to help you to have said anything to the cops. I can tell you that. And what I think is worse is that those of us who do have the privilege to engage in a law enforcement encounter where we go along to get along, that actually hurts all of our neighbors who don't have that privilege, because it means that cops are able to profile us even better. If all of us in this country assert our rights against cops, the entire game changes in the criminal legal system. The entire game changes. There are many of us, including myself, who I could, you know, have a 30-minute conversation with a cop and I'd probably be let off for doing all sorts of stuff that other people in this room would never have that chance. But my duty, my responsibility to everyone around me is to protect the rights that people have died for. And I don't mean just our military. I mean my friends and the fellow activists around this country and throughout history have died for the ability to have this. And so, yeah, some of us in this room can get away with talking our way out of a ticket, but many of us cannot. And it's our duty all together to assert these rights so that they still exist.
I have a question. So if it's a speeding ticket and you assert your rights and they give you a ticket and they ask you to sign, do you refuse to sign?
You can. They're just going to hand that to you. They're going to say served. They're going to write served on there.
What does the I want to see a lawyer part like do? Like they have to like do you then have to like call your lawyer? Like if you have a lawyer, like find one. Like what does that mean?
So what that once you are being held against your will, which doesn't necessarily mean handcuffed or in jail, it just means that you're not free to go. We'll talk more about that after the break. Once you are being detained, the cop can't ask you any questions if you've invoked your right to see a lawyer. You have a right to be with an attorney when you're answering questions involuntarily from a law enforcement officer. And so you will see, and I have seen searches or encounters where somebody invokes their right to remain silent, somebody invokes their right to see a lawyer, and the cop keeps asking questions, which they might do, because again, we can't protect against what they do and don't do. We can just control our rights. Those answers that they might get out of you later will probably be excluded from any kind of evidence that can be used against you. So once you say they see a lawyer, and the other thing, I mean, when I call this a counterspell, I really mean it, because the cops know once somebody has said this, oh shit, we've got to do something different. And so you're going to not only protect yourself in the future, but you may change the cop's behavior. Now, the question from the back, which was, you know, isn't that going to piss the cop off? And some cops it is, but they know what this means for them in the long run. And so in a lot of instances, it will change their behavior and to your benefit.